Hello and welcome to this episode of the Blockdaemon podcast. Today we are joined by Collin Myers and Oisín Kyne, co-founders of Obol Labs, as well as Freddie Zwansker, Blockdaemon's Ethereum ecosystem lead, and Gaetan Thabo, head of protocol and foundation partnerships at Blockdaemon. In this episode, we dive into the intricacies of Distributed Validator Technology, or DVT, a pivotal innovation in Ethereum staking, with insights on how it bolsters network security, reliability, and aligns with the risk mitigation strategies crucial for financial institutions. We explore how the team at Obal are unlocking new opportunities for the Ethereum staking community as they build accessible, secure, and robust infrastructure to support institutional staking participation. But without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the Blockdaemon podcast. So, Collin, could you please introduce yourself? In particular, what led you to co-founding Obol Labs?
Yeah, hey everyone. Thanks for having us out today. Blockdaemon, big supporters of Obal project since the beginning. So excited to come on the podcast and explain for your users a bit deeper about what we're up to and how it applies to the institutional market. So yeah, background on myself. I actually have been working on only Ethereum since 2016. I joined Consensus at the end of 2017. And while at Consensus, I spent a lot of time on different areas, but all had to do with staking. So whether it was a staking product or staking data or staking rewards or the network spec, I was quite involved in the earlier phases of what is Ethereum 2, what is the specification, what are the rewards, how are we going to roll this thing out? And during that process and evolution, which was about 2.5 years of work, we looked at a variety of different topics. One of them that was the most compelling to me, what has become now DVT. At the time, it was just a research effort sponsored by the EF that was focused on the trust minimization of validators and just making the validator a more security-focused entity rather than just this kind of monolithic, simple being. It was really taking it and making it more secure. So yeah, I took a look at that effort. At this time, it was the pandemic. I was thinking about what to do best with my time. I had built a project inside of Consensus called Activate, which I had traded for, equity essentially, and then exited the company and was thinking about what to do with my time and what the most impactful area I could spend on was. And DVT presented itself to me as the most important thing I could spend my time on. So at that point, I began to try to figure out how to build a project around it. And that's when Oisín and we crossed paths again. We had previously worked together at Consensus. And he was in the Dublin office, I was in the London office and the New York office for some time. And that's when it came together and we began to actually figure out how can you take this infrastructure primitive and turn it into a product in a way that decentralizes the network, serves a broad group of users, and actually helps the network mature and scale so it can achieve its mission, which is, DVT's in the business of sorting through the problem of like how to keep the lights on, how to make sure that consensus is credibly neutral and that the network actually doesn't stop working, or right, and so it doesn't stall. So yeah, there were profound implications. Him and I kind of looked at each other and said, this is probably it. It looks really hard, but let's see if we can get people to support. And yeah, here we are now 2.5 years later, and Obal's on mainnet with being run by nearly 60 different entities, which is our current big kind of KPI internally, is just distribution of operator and understanding and education of the general technology. And yeah, Blockdaemon's been a big supporter through that process.
Great stuff, Collin. Thanks for that context there. And Gaetan, can you introduce yourself as well? Maybe describe your role at Blockdaemon and what Blockdaemon does in the wider Web3 ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you both, Collin and Oisín, for being part of that podcast. Oisín, long time supporter of Blockdaemon, because you were a Blockdaemon yourself a few years ago. Yeah, my role is essentially, so formerly head of protocol and foundation. My role is to manage and help the relationship that we have with a bunch of different protocols, right? Established ones that are maybe less established, or brand new ones that are more of a testnet, devnet type of efforts, and where Blockdaemon can really support by providing a lot of the expertise that we have. So our positioning is very institutional, is providing infrastructure with level of service that's highly secure, highly reliable, highly redundant, and and compliant to serve the largest institutions that we have. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, CTR on our cap table. These are kind of the target audiences that we have, we are large market shares in custodians and large wallets and all of that. So this is high performance product that we want to provide to our cohorts of customers. And DVT, so decentralized validator technology, presents itself as a very promising kind of technology that we want to help support from the very beginning. So that's been the sort of the beginning a little bit of the journey, and my role here is really to facilitate that relationship and support, make sure that our engineer, our ops, all our resources are put in the right place to be a good partner, a strategic partner of Obol. So excited to work with you guys, obviously.
And with that support then in place, Gaetan, I'd love to talk a bit more about the collaboration between Obol and Blockdaemon. Oisín, maybe you could give us a bit of an overview into the development of Obol, the recent launch of Obol's mainnet open beta, and just as Chief Technical Officer in Obol, just tell me a bit around where Obol is in its current development.
Yeah, absolutely. And I might go and start by what Gaetan alluded to, that Obol and Blockdaemon got started working together while I was working for Blockdaemon, leading out Ethereum 2 R&D for you guys. I was told to attend one of these kind of working groups for shared secret validators, as it was known at the time, which none other than Collin was co-presenting and organizing back in 2020 in around Genesis. So even since then, I came back from that call and I was immediately like, yeah, this is definitely going to be a thing. This is the highly available validator software that I thought would already exist, but turns out it needs building. And yeah, things progressed from there. I moved on from Blockdaemon to start this with Collin in the middle of 2021. And Blockdaemon have been an investor since the seed round and supportive of us all the way through. I've done a lot of work with Constantine and given some like talks and panels around the world at certain conferences. But yeah, Blockdaemon has been kind of, always kind of unflinching, pretty supportive of it. They were like, yeah, this software will be a thing and we're going to be, pretty skilled in it and familiar with it from day one. So they've been running it for, God knows, Freddie, as someone might know, the first time you've been running it, probably more than a year at this point, I'd say. But yeah, quite a while, I would say. And then, sorry, you asked me about our mainnet beta. So about a year ago now, almost, we put our first validator on mainnet. This was one run by the core team to prove that it was kind of real and the technology was legit. And since then, in about the middle of this year, we rolled out an alpha program with certain kind of participants, Blockdaemon being one of them. And now we've kind of upgraded to an open beta where we just have our launchpad available to the general public, still capped at one validator for the time being. But anyone can go to beta.launchpad.obol.tech and create a distributed validator, either alone, where they run all of the pieces of the validator, or in a group where they get 3 or more other operators to run a validator with themselves. So things have been going well. We're super excited. The plan is to announce the full version 1 early in the new year when it's kind of things are stable, and 1 or 2 more things to kind of release along the way as part of that. But all in all, pretty happy with things. We're currently under our second audit of Charon, like third security or fourth security assessment of our time at Obol. So it's been a busy end of year for me, but I'm generally glad for it. I'm pretty excited for next year. It should hopefully be pretty action-packed.
Great stuff, Oisín. And then Freddie, coming to yourself, from Blockdaemon's perspective, what has been the experience experimenting with Obol's technology? Do you have any insights there that you can provide?
Yeah, absolutely. So as the Ethereum ecosystem lead here at Blockdaemon, I'm sort of, staying in touch and trying to, help navigate all of our portfolio companies, either working together, working with Blockdaemon, working with other parts of the ecosystem, and obviously, trying to, shape the product or our products, our Blockdaemon products, in a way that is, most useful for our institutional customers, which have, some specific needs that might be a little bit different from more, Web3 kind of native businesses in some degree. And with Obal, what we're doing, and this is also fitting in that narrative right now, we're testing this at scale, right? Because obviously things are always looking a little bit different when you have like 1 validators or 10 validators versus like, thousands or tens of thousands of validators like we do. So that's the part that we're testing right now in different setups, different configurations, spreading those clusters worldwide, looking at latency and performance and all that kind of thing. And things are looking good. And maybe one anecdote that I want to share is that we actually did set up the cluster and had a disk failure in one of the machines. And our node operations team obviously got the alert, and whenever an alert of a failure comes in like that, they all get excited and try to act as swiftly as possible. And then they realize, oh, it's in the Obal cluster, and the cluster is just chugging along very nicely, and so there's no rush. We can actually keep our nerves and assess what's going on, and also, so number one, it relieved the stress very, very, very easily. And also the thing is that eventually we didn't have to fail over that node, because that's obviously something that any node operator wants to avoid because of the risk of flashing for double signing. I mean, there's obviously various mitigations that we have in place, but if you don't even have to do it, then it's even better, right? Then there's absolutely no risk. So in that matter, it wasn't a problem, to replace the disk and have that one node out of the cluster offline, because the rest of the cluster just kept on, attesting and earning rewards. So that's kind of a true testament to the story of additional resilience that is added, by Obal to the staking process. And I think that's a huge benefit, not only for our node operations people that might have a little bit better sleep quality, but also obviously for the network and for the customers that are relying on those machines.
And Freddie, as Ethereum ecosystem lead here in Blockdaemon, I just want to zoom out a second to the wider ETH landscape and Obal's role in that. But 2023 has been a bit of a shaky year for blockchain and the staking industry, particularly from the institutional side, in America. But at the same time, Ethereum has seen new increases in staking interest, particularly after the Shapella withdrawal enablement earlier this year. Can you just give us some insight into why you think this is? What are some of the tailwinds that are driving institutional interest in ETH staking? Is it the fact that ETH is deflationary? There's clarity around ETH not being a security. Could you give us some of your insights there into the overall landscape for ETH as we wrap up 2023?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to. So I think, obviously I'm sort of the in-house maxi for ETH, right? And I truly do believe that it is a great ecosystem. Obviously, I definitely also believe in the multi-chain world in the future, but I think particularly in the institutional space, or in the end, if there's no market craziness, let's put it that way, either in the bull or the bear range kind of thing, then I think there is a tendency towards quality, and that's just with ETH as the number one, well, it's number two asset obviously after Bitcoin, but the number one asset in anything where you can do more than a store of value with, basically. I think that's strong, and people realize the value. And going back in history, when I first learned about staking and dug deep into it, it's like the internet bond was a paper, I think that was Collin co-published. The obviously not risk-free rate of return, but that's sort of the closest analogy to the TradFi business. And I think that's people do see that. And while other networks might promise higher protocol rewards, they're also inflating away all those rewards. So the net gain is actually less sometimes than on Ethereum. Plus you have the, increased risk of, anything bad happening, or the chain stopping, or, all sorts of things that would never happen on Ethereum, hopefully, but luckily in history it hadn't happened yet. So I think that's, also that ETH is not considered a security, at least at this point. That's more clear for ETH than for other assets. So all of these things are sort of, contributing, I think, to the quality that is indeed, realized by the market. Not any meme, is driving the market crazier, but as the markets mature, I think this will become more and more apparent. So I'm very hopeful that, Ethereum as an ecosystem and also ETH as the asset will, basically come out strong in 2024, and probably will, double down on that narrative and maybe outsize growth compared to the rest of the market.
And with all that in mind, Collin, I'd just like to get your insight into the journey of Obal, your own journey over the last year, how the Ethereum landscape has influenced Obal's journey, and what insights or lessons you've gleaned from these experiences over the last 12 months?
Yeah, great question. So first and foremost, Obol's incredibly lucky to have a community that has a great ethos to build off of, and that's just the Ethereum community, right? So like Obol is a project that's based upon the belief of like, you can profitably decentralize the network. And this is a phase in Ethereum where like the core ethos of the community is very favorable to this, and it gives us a lot of support. It brings us a lot of interest. It brings us a lot of users. We are a tokenless project, which in this space is difficult to compete sometimes, but it's been because we've been able to build like a really strong community around an ethos, which is decentralizing stake right now is one of the most important things that we can do. So for us, it's been a great experience of working closely with the Ethereum Foundation, being very close to the core specification. We have this rule internally where we call it the Goldilocks phase, but you don't ever want to be too far behind the key roadmap, and you don't ever want to be too far in front of the key roadmap. So you have to like hover in this space where sometimes you're floating behind it, you're getting feedback from the core developer community as to what's best. And then there are other times where you need to kind of get in front of it and be like, hey, look, we've done a lot of research in this area, and we believe that, it should go in this direction. So there's kind of this whole lobbying as to how you deal with the core protocol spec. And we've been fortunate enough to be able to be successful at that. And to have a strong community of people help us achieve our mission. Again, at the end of the day, DVT is not like MEV, right? It's not this lottery system you get put in and you luckily win money. It's not that. It's a security protocol. It's not supposed to be sexy like these other things. So the adoption path of it, without the support of like the ethos of the Ethereum community, it would be much more difficult for us to adopt the technology. But honestly, it's been a slow journey. These are cryptographic infrastructure tools. When we started pitching DVT to people, there were no validators, and now validator entities and the cost of a validator and the value that's been accrued is substantial. So convincing people that you're offering them something new and advanced that results in more security is certainly an uphill battle, as it should be. People should have confidence in the Ethereum stacks that they use today. And most of the large providers in this space do have great track records of never being slashed. So you bring something to the table and say, hey, this doesn't slash you. And it's say, well, we've never been slashed anyways. Who cares? One area on the institutional perspective that's been very helpful to our adoption has been the insurance market. And it's been a huge tailwind for getting DVT to become more standardized, which is that all validator entities or operators who offer high performance products, included in those products is some type of guarantee or policy, right? And on the back end, they have to have that provided by an insurance provider. Is more economically efficient than doing it on balance sheet. But today, providing that or getting that from insurance providers is very expensive because a bad day at the office, if you get slashed, is you could lose all 32 ETH. And with DVT, a bad day at the office is not that case. So we've had insurance providers come to us and offer to create insurance packages that are at a discount for the validator node operator industry, because it does decrease the chance of slashing, it decreases the risk. And for us, that's it's the insurance industry, so it's not as exciting as other parts of DeFi. But for us, it's a big win. That's a huge win. And we start thinking about, Ether ETFs. For us, we start thinking about staked Ether ETFs. And then we start thinking about, the infrastructure providers that are going to need to be a part of that. There's going to need to be multiple of them. They're going to need to have high security. They're going to need to have high uptime. Well, clearly, they're going to have to use DVT. And clearly, there's going to be an insurance policy probably on the back end of the product. Insurance has been a big win for us as it's helped us gain in new markets. We have immense support of the at-home validator community. We have immense support of like the DeFi liquid staking community. And now we're trying to, buck up into the institutional community and, show them that we can add value, and getting the tailwind from insurance has been very helpful to doing that.
I think this cannot be, let's say, put as clearly as possible. I think the way you positioned Obol and the DVT topic is really tremendously valuable. Like this alignment, yes, you got tailwind from that, but you also, navigated this very well. Like being tokenless, for example, it just reduces the friction of any onboarding or any processes that we, for example, as an operational burden would have to carry. So it's just super easy, and it shows that you're not going the easiest way, but the most sensible way in a way, and also putting the community, putting the security first versus then like your own value accrual or something. I can totally believe that puts a lot of stress on you as the founders and people in charge. So I just want to thank you for going the long and hard route, because eventually I think it will pay off both for you but also for the network. And I think that's really if you're looking back and also when you said this is the most important problem to work on, you can also say like hopefully you solved it in the best possible way. So yeah, really kudos to you. And I learned from your expertise and education, I learned a lot about the different use cases from the different angles, like you mentioned, like liquid staking protocols, probably the earliest adopters at larger scale in production, but also the institutional potential for cost saving in the insurance space, potential cost saving in the infrastructure place, also the staking with your peers, and you can team up with like-minded individuals, so it helps the solo staking community, and so all sorts of different narratives that all resonate with different parts of the community. I think that you've really been very strong on that.
And as a follow-up question then, Freddie or Gaetan, Collin mentioned the role of insurance, but also the incoming or the expected ETPs, ETF products that will be introduced to the market. And Gaetan, you're both people that speak to institutions within the industry. What challenges at the moment do you see from institutions that potentially block them from participating in Ethereum staking?
Yeah, I can start, and Freddie, I can let you complement if you have additional insights. My take on that is, I think for a lot of these institutions, blockchain as a technology represented sort of a promise of something new and better than what exists currently, particularly around security. So security was the key, I think, value proposition around immutability, transparency, and censorship resistance of the properties of blockchain, right? And I think Obol is a very interesting piece of technology around security. Now, what might be missing around for let's say, mass adoption from institutions, though if you look at some numbers, there's still already a decent adoption by a lot of very traditional institutions into the e-space from using the technology or looking at the token in terms of how can they secure Ethereum itself. And so some barriers to entry that still exist is around obviously compliance and regulations and the ability for them to see very clearly how they can use it, how they can report it to their competent authorities and regulators, and making sure that this is in line with whatever requirements that they have. So it's kind of a little bit of out of our hands in a way. It's like it's the work of legislators. It's for us to be contributing to that public debate and educating legislators and ultimately informing this regulation. But I would say that the key central piece that I think we're all working towards is making this system, this new system, as secure as possible, as transparent as possible, is realizing the original promise of blockchain technology in a way, right? That ultimately, in my mind, will pay off by informing legislation that will provide clarity, that will bring like the mass adoption by institutions and ultimately retail users of that technology. So it's kind of a circle answered and long-winded, but in a nutshell, that's what I see. I don't know, Freddie, if there is any additional points you want to add.
I was just going to say, like, it is about the, let's say, maturity of this new world, which is not new to us anymore, but new to some of those TradFi institutions, and certainly for the regulators, I guess. And for them to get comfortable, I think it's super important to show them, mechanisms that keeps them safe or reduce, let's say, single points of failure. And obviously DVT is a prime example for that. So, and then the other part that is interesting, I mean, obviously we have high hopes for institutional adoption, but even for the retail adoption, I mean, traditionally in blockchain, that was the first asset class, I guess, that was, retail first, and then the institutions coming in. And I'm not sure, like, I think the institutions are sort of on the sidelines, and they they want to get in, but they might be held back by compliance and regulatory affairs or something. So if really 24 is another bull run, and sparks new interest also in other parts of the let's say retail industry, and as staking becomes more ubiquitous in wallets or embedded into other systems, then I think there could be even another sort of push for retail and hopefully also for solo staking, and not just using Coinbase or Kraken or any of the large entities, so that people would have be let's say to be confident enough to run a validator. And obviously DVT helps a lot in that sense, because like Oisín, I think it was said it in the last podcast of you guys where I was participating. It was like you can sleep better, or you can travel out of country or out of town and have your home server go down, but not have to worry, because your other mates are going to keep the cluster running. And so that allows for more on that more like a hobbyist front as well. So that could be another piece of the puzzle, which then indirectly helps again the institutional market, because it shows how distributed and decentralized the network is. So it, like Etan said, it's all referencing back to each other, and so that's my hope.
And with that in mind, then, Collin, I'd like to get your vision of DVT a year from now, 5 years from now, and then how it would address the needs of TradFi institutions for ETH staking mass adoption. And are there any specific features or development that you are planning to implement that will improve that or build on that vision and that roadmap?
Yeah, good question. So the way we see 2024 is actually kind of split in its so 2024 is kind of the big year of adoption. We've had initial adoption over 2023, and next year is kind of when we start to get into percentages of network stake that it's run by DVT. Today we're haven't cracked the percentage of network stake perspective, but next year that's what will take place. We look at this in two manners, one of which is like, what happens to all the existing stake? So today there's a lot of existing stake in the network that is secured without DVT. And that will probably want to use it. So how do you migrate? There's a withdrawal and restake, which is incredibly economically inefficient. And then there's more of a migration process where the validators stay online. So we were looking at things a lot now, is like, what's the herd gonna, how will they migrate? And we suspect that somewhere around 10% of network stake over next year will migrate, of current stake will migrate over to DVT, which are actually pretty conservative numbers. Again, we're being kind of conservative here because there's just a lot of constituents. It's a security. So the migration process, we think, will take a couple of years. So to your question of 5 years, I think that some of the migration work of the current stake will take up to 3 years, actually, truthfully, because you got to move these things over. There's a lot of value at risk. It's DVT doesn't make it more or less safe. It's just another step that you have to do, which requires coordination of people. If we look at the next category, which is new stake, that's probably where our vision changes a bit. And we perceive over the course of 2024 that half of new stake that comes into the network will come inside of DVT. Right now, there aren't any great outlets of volume to use DVT yet, just based on how these mainnet launches are going. We foresee the first volume-is area where DVT will be deployed is in the Lido simple DVT module, which is to launch in the first quarter of next year. We're doing a lot of great final testing on that and getting everything in shape. Everything's, we're on roadmap. Everything's going great there. So that'll be the first time that it actually gets opened up to a much larger universe of people. And then we think that has power law effects on the product landscape. And that's how we've been judging our go-to-market, is really kind of doing it more like Optimism or a layer 2, where we partner with a couple projects. We work really hard on their specifications. We help them migrate. We help them launch with it. And in this case, we were lucky that the person most adamant about adopting it first is the most competitive, and the one that people follow the most. So in our sense, we think that Lido starting out with working with Obal on DVT has been great for the space, because it'll convert everyone super quickly to just adopt the technology, because it can then become table stakes. And that's how we think of it in the institutional sense. So now I'll kind of get to where we see things in the institutional market. our goal in the institutional space is to get people to better understand that it is table stakes. And we've, having more institutional investors work with us on future capital rounds has been an exciting topic of getting them involved. So these are all burgeoning, steps to getting more inside of institutional market. And inside of institutional market, we position ourselves more like Intel, whereas like everyone's going to run different types of hardware, and that's the validator. But on the inside of the validator, there's something that is unison, and we want that to be Obol DVT middleware. And then it becomes table stakes, where every product you build, it's required to have it. It's like a security standard. If you don't have it, it becomes more of a weakness for your product. And that's the state of mental adoption and psychological adoption that DVT will need to fully bust through the institutional market, is the mindset of table stakes. And everything we're doing now with the at-home validator, the liquid staking pool, is in a manner to create that, again, without a token. So there's a lot of creativity into how you make people want something without paying them to adopt it, which by the time we break through that, getting to the institutional market will be quite easy because it'll be standardized.
I think you can produce another piece of great swag instead, like Obol inside, like the Intel inside kind of thing around it. I think that would go very well. I'd be proudly wearing it.
That's actually what we call it internally. That was one of Brett's massive initiatives. Our CGO, when he came on, he's like, we need to position this thing like Intel. And it's been about a year and a half of us trying to do it. Really subliminally. We haven't ever exclusively really even said that we're doing that until now, but it's working, which is good. And we're going to continue on that path.
But you mentioned a really good point there, Colin. It was that the migration and also the new stake, that there's two different factors there. But Freddie, from an infrastructure perspective, then, with Blockdaemon being one of the largest Ethereum infrastructure providers in the world, how does Blockdaemon support play a role in supporting Obal and bringing institutional liquidity to Ethereum staking?
Right. Well, so there's Obal and there's all sorts of other initiatives, obviously, but let's focus on the DVT part first there. And I think it's really, in helping educate, in being involved in the testing and providing feedback for the particularities of, let's say, institutional needs, or let's say at least at scale staking, and how it can integrate in our special types of infrastructure and things like that. That's what we've been in touch with the Obol team a lot. I think that helps. Obviously, we also do see the potential for the likes of Lido, and I totally agree that those will be the first major adopters, and for them it's obviously immensely helpful, because it can change the narrative of them being too large and too centralized and whatnot. And now I think they want to bring on 200 new node operators from the existing, 30 something now, which Blockdaemon is one of the earliest ones. But obviously we're also interested in decentralizing this massive amount of stake, about a little less than 1/3 of all Ethereum stake there. So yeah, it's truly in many different ways that we are working on it. Another example that it excites me currently, because it's also another test that we're running, is eigenlayer restaking, obviously. And so there's all sorts of things, and I'm curious sort of to see how that will all play together, because if there's more responsibilities and duties on those validators and that collateral on ETH, right, then it becomes even more important to protect it. And then DVT can play a role in it, but then also if you add all these bits and pieces on your node that runs the Sharon middleware, and then you have also the AVSs of eigenlayer, and it'll get more complicated, which obviously we as professional node operators are born to handle that, and happy to take that burden off anyone basically that wants to use our services. But also it's it makes a simple thing and a very straightforward thing just more complicated. So I'm super curious to see how this will evolve, and then also in all sorts of other ecosystems and layer 2s and whatnot. I mean, all this, the complexity I think is just exploding at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see how it can come together, and we obviously see also our role as sort of simplifying that a little bit, and definitely filtering out the signal from all the noise. But I'm very confident that DVT and Obol is very much part of the signal. So,
well, Freddie, you mentioned there Charon. I just want to double click on that. I know, Oisín, you mentioned it earlier in the call as well. Could you just give us a bit of introduction what Charon is, elaborate on it a bit, what its significance is in ensuring high availability validation, and also some of the developer-friendly toolings that you've recently introduced. Maybe a high-level understanding of these would be helpful to understand a bit more about the inner workings of DVT.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Charon is the brains of a distributed validator to some extent. It is the piece of software that you add into a normal validating stack that enables it to be a distributed validator. One of the things that I'm really happy about with Charon, and something that Freddie alluded to earlier about like pushing for doing this the right way rather than the fast or the easy way, is Charon is a middleware, and it specifically does not have access to the private keys of the validator. And this made my life a little more difficult. It means Charon has to work with all of the different like validator clients that exist, which there's about 6 of them. But the benefit is huge for the security aspect of it, meaning that if there was to be like a software compromise, which I worry about regularly, the Charon client shouldn't be able to exfiltrate those private keys, or at least it would be incrementally more difficult, because you'd have to compromise the Charon client and probably the validator client, and maybe other things like the containerization software as well. I'm getting a bit too into the technical weeds in there, and I was told to keep it relatively on the whys rather than the how. But as for some of the other developer tooling that comes with it, and even just kind of user tooling, there's maybe 3 things I'd kind of mention. We've a piece of Solidity called Obal splits. These are immutable, non-updatable splitter contracts that receive a validator's rewards and split them into kind of percentages, and it can split off the principal from the rewards, and you can kind of set up, who gets what in your distributed validator. Another piece is a software development kit, or an SDK. This is for the node operators and the like liquid staking protocols that are looking to kind of automate distributed validators. They can send invites to new clusters, they can provision them, they can do most of that programmatically with an SDK. But lastly, and maybe the one that people are most familiar with, is our front end. We know it's the Distributed Validator Launchpad. This is a user interface that kind of walks you through the process of creating distributed validators, shows you how to install them, how to install Charon and the software into your existing stack, and so on. And it's a place that you can work with other counterparties to set up a distributed validator, because it's one thing if you're doing this in a centralized manner and you have all of the like commands yourself, you can just create the keys locally and it's all good. But one of the most powerful ways to use DVs is where you're using it with a group, where no one entity has the full private keys. And to do that, you need to kind of authenticate your counterparties, trust them, create the keys together. So the Launchpad kind of guides users through that flow and makes it nice and easy, and has a dashboard at the end that shows the cluster that's been created, and generally makes the distributed validator more real, you might say. So between Charon, the piece that sits in the middle, and all the different tooling around it, the goal is to make DVs a thing, that they're kind of accessible, visible, easy to integrate, easy to run, secure being a big one. We've lots of fear about compromised supply chains these days, and it's given me a lot of vindication as to be paranoid about it, to be honest. Yeah, that's what it was.
I'd like to double click on 2 points that you mentioned, Oisín, because I think we were talking about mass adoption by institutions, and there's 2 very relevant points in what you said. One is the user experience and how the Launchpad is trying to simplify how to launch DVTs, even though it might not be directly targeted to them, ultimately makes the process of having secure DVT technology in your stack easy, or as easy as possible. And I think that's really a nice way to tie it back to how we're going to reach these institutions, by making the tech as easy as possible. The second point is nobody's holding the full private key, and you're certainly not holding any private key. We are not either, and I think that's a very important point, because that's something we have to re-educate our customers on, or prospects at least on, is we're a non-custodial provider. And that's very important, because for them as an institution, particularly traditional institution, it means you control your assets, you own your assets, you're in total ownership of your assets. And that's kind of a key pieces of the puzzle of blockchain for the future, where self-custody is the model and self-ownership is the model. So I just wanted to double click on that, because I think they're interesting points.
For sure. And I might actually follow up on that private key one and add a little bit of nuance. So you're absolutely right in saying Blockdaemon is non-custodial and that it can't take the funds. But there is one small thing, that with an Ethereum validator, there's 2 private keys. There's a withdrawal key, which is where the money goes, and then there's the hot key that stays on and is signing and stuff. And in a normal validator perspective, if that key was to be stolen, there's a chance that the attacker can slash you. And if that key were to be lost or corrupted, or the backups would be kind of gone, the validator potentially couldn't be exited and would be stuck there for 20 years. That's kind of happened to one project called Stakehound, where they accidentally deleted their private keys and then the validators were gone forever. And another example of something I fortunately haven't seen too much of is people who have their validator keys stolen, and then somebody says, hey, here's 2 signed slashable messages. You should pay me to go away so I don't slash all your validators or something. And this is something that kind of can happen, particularly when the validator, like private keys in one location. You see things like the compromise that happened in like SUI clients, where they left open an endpoint that allowed people to kind of run code on them, or whatever the case may be, or generally even just compromising DevOps is just giving them a dodgy PDF and stuff. But if you're an institution, you want to know what happens if my operator gets hacked, and in the like solo operator case, the chances they could get slashed, and you're falling back to insurance and payouts, and it's not great. But with a distributed validator, 4 entities or more entities can have pieces of the private key, and so long as like only one of them gets hacked, no problem. Things stays online. There's nothing really they can do. You want to rotate keys for best practice, but it reduces it, pushes the kind of barrier even one step further in terms of telling a customer like how little can go wrong. It's like, yes, we can't steal your money. No, we can't even like lose your money, hopefully. And that's kind of that one extra thing that DVT adds that I think is important, particularly for the risk-averse end of the spectrum.
Definitely. And Oisín, there you mentioned other chains and other networks, and the developer tooling that you're building, the technology that you're building, in some ways, it could apply to any blockchain, not just Ethereum, for a lot of institutional use cases. So Collin, something that I'd like to get your perspective on is, what role do you potentially see DVT playing, not just in Ethereum staking, but DVT adoption potentially in other ecosystems or in other trends such as restaking or even L2 shared sequencing? And do you see the potential of this technology expanding just beyond staking?
Yeah, it's a great question. Since we started the project, we have kept a keen eye on where else it could go and how else it could be used. Again, it was designed from a perspective of this is like a generalized cryptography primitive that's being applied to the validator. But now it's been a where else can it go? So there's a couple different ways and paths, one of which is horizontal and one's vertical is the way we think of it. So if you think about DVT in more of the horizontal sense, it is going to other networks and rinsing and repeating, the same solution, assuming the problems exist. What we found is that in other layer 1 protocols, they would want to adopt DVT for different reasons. And none of the current layer 1 protocols are mature enough yet to consider it to be valuable, like Ethereum. And we spent quite a bit of time examining, the Cosmos network, for example, and there is some existing types of software, which is like, 2 versions before what DVT is, but there's no necessity or need to invest in those technologies because the amount of stake at risk inside of that ecosystem hasn't hit this critical scale where everyone sees DVT as being like a no-brainer. In addition to that, DVT in the current form of which we've researched it and applied it is heavily bound to BLS signatures. So any blockchain that uses BLS signature technology, cryptography, it's much easier to apply what we've done due to the signatures being homomorphically additive. However, not all blockchains support BLS. And those that do support BLS, they have pretty quick block times. They're designed to be different than Ethereum. They are designed to be more centralized in nature. So the longer block times in Ethereum, you have 4 seconds to do your duties, also really enables DVT to be valuable because you have a chance for a group of people to come to consensus before you do your duties. Whereas in like Solana or something, the whole premise of how that is built is not around decentralization. So how DVT would make sense there is less clear today, as it's been bootstrapped more from a decentralization perspective. So today, like on the layer 1s, we keep a close eye with the Cosmos ecosystem. We're kind of aligned with their vision. We've spent a lot of time with their constituents doing user research and trying to figure out how to get it inside of their ecosystem. We think it's a bit early for them, but it's one that we keep close eyes on that could, use it for the app chain thesis, right? In the app chain thesis, it's expensive to add more and more validators to decentralize your app chain. So add less validators and have them use DVT so that the risk of one of them going offline is much lower. So it helps the app chain economically scale is what our research led to. The other more exciting area is growing DVT vertically. And that's the more Ethereum aligned growth path, which is what we've spent, I would say, the majority of our time on. And that is taking the validator entity as an actor and then saying, what other actors need to be trust minimized today? And as the network now grows in the proof of stake sense, we're seeing more actors come to the table that are having trust put in them. And these are your block builders, these are your sequencers, these will eventually be your provers and your verifiers for a lot of the ZK plumbing. You know, over time, all of these infrastructure layers in Ethereum get built out. There's some trust in the beginning, and then there's an effort to detrust, if you will, and minimize it over time. And the majority of individual actors that rely on duties in a distributed network can be untrusted in a way by using trust minimized signing, which is what really DVT is under the hood. Today, it's just being used for the validator. So yeah, we're excited about the vertical path. We're adamantly looking at the sequencer to seeing if we can add value there. We've done quite a bit of research to see if we can add value. We're also a bit perplexed to find out how like DVT at the layer 2 area would economically sustain itself. There's not a lot of actual economics for anyone to be shared up there, and we can't continue to think that these core infrastructures are free for everyone, that just really doesn't necessarily work. So, you know, there's a lot of people thinking distributed sequencers are a thing. There's been a lot of chatter about it. There's a lot of been an investment and brain power put in behind it. We think it's going to be a thing, but we don't know how economically viable it is, honestly. Similarly to some of these other actors, like provers and verifier markets are still very, very early. We've spent a little bit of time on the block builder. That would be a bit more of like an MPC style solution, so not necessarily, you know, cut in stone. And then the other one is things like Gnosis Chain, which is what we would call ECL forks, so the Ethereum consensus layer forks. Now that the spec is hardened and post-merge, we expect many new blockchains and competing layer 1 and hybrid layer 1s to just fork the core Ethereum consensus spec, which comes with BLS, which enables us to just go to those chains and offer DVT to those ecosystems as well. So yeah, again, we're looking at 3 or 4 different paths as to where the technology goes, and we're straddling all of them right now, temperature checking, and trying to figure out how to honestly explore all of them is what we'd like to do, but there's only so much we can grow into.
And just looking ahead, I think what you said is just a great vision in my head, that if you think about, number one, you mentioned MPC, and obviously Blockdaemon is also an MPC company. We have this institutional wallet, and I'm thinking like, this is, in my naive non-cryptographer head, you know, this is sort of the same thing, right? You're having a key in different pieces, and then you put it together to do something, right? Whether that's signing or whether that's validator or, you know, whatever, but it's sort of related. So I wonder how that'll, you know, eventually, you know, work out and might be integrated in different aspects or something. And then you mentioned MEV, which is obviously also another super vital component for our validators, and we get a lot of questions about that, obviously, as well. So, you know, it's fascinating to me, again, how this, you know, comes together in different pieces and forms. And yeah, that's what keeps me exciting in the space, and that's what I think the future will hold in all sorts of remixes, basically, of different parts of the technology, maybe.
And as we come to the end of the discussion today, I'd love, Oisín, maybe give us your perspective on how you see DVT evolving. What implications does it have for the future of Ethereum, and then particularly in the context of institutional participation?
Yeah, great question. So again, I see kind of maybe 2 different axes of this approach. There's the adoption side of things, and then there's maybe the tech and bleeding edge R&D side. If I talk on the adoption side, we've already talked about kind of insurance, enterprises getting adopted with it. One of the things we do a lot of work on is making sure we support remote signers, and better yet, eventually, like hardware signers. There's a class of particularly traditional enterprises that are like, no, my keys need to be encrypted in memory. Better yet, they want to be kind of on a hardware chip, maybe like an Intel SGX. So getting distributed validators deployed in the most kind of technically secure manners and like the best of data centers with the best of security is like one aspect they want to keep pushing and getting people more comfortable with. And then on the other end of the spectrum, and the more the kind of bleeding edge R&D, right now, these distributed validators, there isn't necessarily a cryptographic proof of who is offline. You can look at your monitoring, you can see node 2 is offline and everybody else can see so, and they can say it or take a screenshot, but that's kind of something that we can do at the human level. But the real ultimate goal is to do something that's kind of cryptographically unforgeable, that you can make a proof that, you know, is impossible to fake, you know, even if you collude, it's very hard to do. And this is what we refer to as like succinctly verifiable, or something that a lot of the kind of ZK projects use when it comes to EVMs. So we've been working with the Nethermind team for about 9 months on what we refer to as the Distributed Validator Protocol. And this is complementing the existing kind of base spec with proofs and kind of latency or competition games that get layered on top, so that you can come out the far side with the proof saying, the Blockdaemon node was on 95% of the time, Collins node was on 80% of the time, these other two are on 99% of the time. Take that into your, you know, algorithm for weighting rewards and penalties, and maybe penalize Colin, and, you know, like kind of, you know, change the weightings and stuff. This is not something we built day one because we realized it was very complicated, very kind of easy to kind of subvert, and not really anyone was looking for it. What people wanted was the tech, not the kind of crypto economic game. But we've been pushing pretty hard on the research on this front and pioneering it to have it like out in the public, to allow people to, you know, do some more of this and to get more untrusted in their cooperation with other people and get it closer to just, you know, raw math and cryptography, which is how you really scale kind of DVs and growth. Because right now you do need to trust your counterparties a reasonable amount. Hopefully we can kind of continue to further like reduce that, so that you could run with people, you know, you don't know, couldn't find almost, and be happy enough with such a thing. So yeah, lots of hard problems on that front anyways. There's no shortage of demand for big brains.
Collin, Oisín, Freddie, Gaitan, many thanks for the input today. Fascinating discussion, and appreciate the conversation. Thank you.